All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Mitigate Risks with File Analysis. We appreciate everyone joining today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second and introduce our speakers today. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. And I'm joined by our key speaker today, Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Misenhimer. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question, so please keep an eye out for that. You'll see it pop up on your screen. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. To kick things off, I have just one slide here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimmal is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, respond quickly to data requests, or comply with policies across multiple sources, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that have been delivering solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, and Altitude, a file analysis solution. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dean so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Shayna. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So, you know, the biggest problem we have today is, or one of the biggest problems we have today is around information chaos. And it's simply the volume of information that we have to deal with now on a day-to-day basis has done nothing but increase over the years. You know, the analyst firm IDC put out some reports that kind of took a look at this. And in 2018, there was 22 trillion gigabytes of data created. And if you have a hard time getting your arms around exactly how much that is, there's a lot of good visuals out on the internet you can look at. But the scary part of that is that was only 2 years ago. By 2025, so 5 years from now, we will create and replicate 175 trillion gigabytes of data. So 7 times more data created and replicated in the course of 7 years of this study. And then 80% of that information is going to be unstructured information. And if you're not familiar with the concept of structured versus unstructured, structured information is information that you're used to seeing in a relational database or in a spreadsheet. It fits nice and neatly into rows and columns. It's text, it's numbers, it's transactional information. Unstructured information are your documents, right? They don't fit neatly into a database table. They're different sizes, they're different formats, they are, and so it's a different problem to organize and manage and get your arms around that information. One too quick there. That brings us to our first poll question. In your daily activities, how many places do you store or look for content in a typical workday? So think about all the places you have to go look for information. SharePoint, SharePoint Online, file shares, in email, and OneDrive, in Google G Suite. Where all are you looking for information? And you can choose one or more of the options here. It's only 1 to 2. It's 2 to 4. It's more than 4, or I've run out of fingers. I can't count them all. And I see a question popped up. Is SharePoint considered structured or unstructured? For this, I would consider it unstructured because it's really about collaboration and storage of documents and then the data related to those documents. So I would call SharePoint unstructured in this respect. So I'm kind of curious to see what the results are here. There we go. So, close to 40%, over 40% have 2 to 4 places they look every day, and close to another 40% have 4 or more, and a few of you have lost count. And that's not surprising. It doesn't take long before you're having to look multiple places to go find information, and that's part of the challenge. Is the risk around information chaos is simply there's a lot of places information exists. And that chaos creates risk. If I don't know what I have out there, and I don't know how to go find what I have out there, I either duplicate information or information doesn't get disposed of, or we don't govern our information properly. As I go to look through my different repositories, right, whether that's SharePoint or SharePoint Online now, right, I can have multiple SharePoint locations. I might have network file shares. I've got email. You could still have PST files sitting around. I've got OneDrive. If you've really adopted the cloud, you may have Google G Suite with Google Drive and Gmail, or you may have Box. There's a lot of places information can go, and there may be inconsistency in the information architecture between those different locations. Right? How folders are structured in my Box environment may be very different from how they are in my SharePoint environment, and how metadata or properties are set up. How a contract is described in one location may be completely different than how it is in another. So how do I go search and find information? Or I may not even have metadata, right? We've talked with a lot of clients over the years. Their environments were set up where there was no metadata. So how do you know what information is out there? And if you're a global organization, these repositories could be in multiple geographies, right? They could, for data sovereignty issues, things may be in different locations. And if they're in different locations, they may be subject to different regulations as to how they need to be kept and retained and disposed of. How long does it take you to search through multiple repositories when you're looking for something? I need to go find my contract for vendor Acme. How many places do I have to go look and find that? Right? And what if it's not well tagged, or what if there's not a good search index I can use? Sometimes you just recreate information because it's easier. I know that report was out there. I can't find it. I'll just recreate it. And now there's 2 versions of it. And so, it takes time to search for and look for and find information. And that time is money, right? Both in the cost of redundant systems out there and in the cost of your employee time to search and look and find and read. So there's some good studies and statistics out there on that as well. And that affects the bottom line of the business. So if we can deal with the information chaos, if we can tame that chaos, there's a bottom line effect for the organization. And that's what Gimmal Altitude is designed to deal with. It really is designed to provide a way to govern all of your data so that you can comply with your information governance policies. First is simply discovering what's out there, right? I remember talking to one client and they said, we don't even know how many OneDrive locations we have, right? And they had thousands of employees. So step one was just figuring out what was out there. And then you can remediate and classify information once you do discover what's out there. So you can address problems, you can classify and dispose of information. Again, we're talking with a client, it was, I could go out and actually look at my network logs, for example, and look for suspect IP addresses or domain names, or I could go find all my contracts that refer to a specific talent inside the contract somewhere. Yeah, you can, because Altitude is designed to give you that visibility into your unstructured data sources, right? To be able to look into the content and tell you what's there. Now you can do, 2 things. You can locate the business value, so you know what you have, you can find what you need, and you can mitigate risk, right? You can get rid of information that should be disposed of, and you can put the other information under records management policy so that it is disposed of when it needs to be disposed of, right? And you do that in a defensible fashion. So rather than PowerPoint you to death today, let's take you into and give you a demonstration of Gimmal Altitude. So Altitude is a SaaS-based product, so step one will be to simply go to the browser and log in. Now that I'm logged into Altitude, this is the main dashboard. And what it shows me is simply across the top, I have a ribbon that shows me all the primary functions of Gimmal Altitude: data governance, classification, analytics. And then on the right, I see notifications of recent activity that's been happening in the system, different analytic policies that have been running and what's going on. And then to the left is kind of my dashboard. I see different locations where I have connectors running that are driving my analytics, the different data sources where I am looking for and analyzing information, and the specific what we call data targets within those locations. So let's start with the connectors. The connector is kind of the bridge between Altitude in the cloud and your data sources within your network, right? My connectors can be installed on network servers anywhere in the environment, and then can reach out and connect to my various data sources. And we'll talk more about those in a moment. I may also want to deploy connectors out across my individual desktops in the organization so that I can do file analytics across personal desktop machines, right? Looking for information. Right? So you can actually do both with Altitude. But when we take a look at the data sources, this is where we start to identify, okay, I want to be able to target and analyze data sources like Exchange Web Services, Exchange in the cloud, my inboxes, my archives, or Google G Suite, my Gmail inboxes, my corporate Gmail, my corporate Google Drive locations. Or I want to go out there and I want to look at my OneDrive locations, right? And I want to analyze content that's out there. Or I may want to connect to Exchange on premise and look for either PST files or look at my inboxes and information in Exchange on-prem. Or I've got SharePoint, both in the cloud and on premise, and I want to analyze my SharePoint content or those network file shares that never seem to go away, right? And every organization has those. So Altitude gives them the ability to connect to all of these different data sources. And then step one, as we talked about, is to go out and do a search of that data source and come back and say, okay, for OneDrive, here are all the actual OneDrive paths that are out there that you could run analytics against. You can run analytics against all of them, or you can pick and choose which ones you want to run analytics against. And as it searches each data source, Altitude now builds a list of all of the available data targets that I have to run analytics against. My Exchange Web Services mailboxes, my Gmail mailboxes, Google Drive, all of my OneDrive locations, the PST files that it found out there, my SharePoint sites that I've searched, all of my Windows file paths, both my network shares and any desktop machines that I've deployed out to, right? These all become sources for analytics. And so that takes us into data governance. Let's take a quick look and kind of see what kind of things we can do with Altitude. So step one with data governance is to create workflows that will actually perform the analytics in the respective data source and the data targets. And my workflows can be set up to be specific to different data sources. So, because if you think about it, the data structure in email is very different than SharePoint than in a file share, right? How they store and organize that information is different. So my different workflows know how to traverse and walk through things like an email structure. If it's a PST file, it has a path, then it has folders, then it has messages. If it's SharePoint or if it's a file share, it's very different, right? So if I go and look at a file system, well, now I'm going to walk through paths and folders and files. And within Altitude, within the browser, I have the ability to view the workflows. But if I actually want to edit those workflows, there's a workflow editor that lets me create and set up my workflows. So here's that workflow for emails. We can see that it knows how to walk through each PST location, each folder within the PST, and then analyze each message. And within the workflows, I can now set up workflows on how to process each PST file, what information to save. As I go into each PST file, I can say, we'll go look at every folder in this PST. And now when we look at the folders, well, maybe one of the first things I want to do is test the folder name. And if it's a folder called spam, ignore it. We don't need to analyze the spam folder, right? So we can be more efficient in how we do our analysis. And then we process each email message. And in this example, as we get to each email message, we may process the attachments. And then we'll look at the email message. In this case, we're testing the date to see how old the email is. If it was received before January 1st, 2017, we're simply going to capture some information about that email. When was it received? Who's the sender? Who was it sent to? What's the subject? And that'll become the basis of the report that Altitude generates for us at the end. And so we just iterate through this process over and over and over again until we have processed all of our emails. And it's a similar process for any of the data sources that we run against. Once we have our workflows created, we simply come in and we set up a policy, and the policy controls how the workflow is executed. When does it run, and which of my data targets does it execute against? So here's the policy for our emails. We simply come in and choose from all of our available emails which one we want to execute, put in a comment. We can run in live mode, but if we're going to do things like move or copy or delete files as part of the analytics, we may want to run in test mode first and be sure we know what's going to happen. We can skip mailboxes on hold if we need to. And then we can come in and choose from our list of available data targets. So this is where we can now come in and start to say, out of all of those data targets that we identified, which ones do we actually want to go analyze as part of this policy? It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? And then we can schedule our policies to run consistently. So they run weekly, monthly, whatever frequency that you need it to run. And at the end of the day, what happens is after all of my policies have executed, I get reports. And the reports show me the results of the analytics that I set up in the workflow. So now I can come in and say, well, you know what, my workflow that ran against my different PST files, here's everything that it found. It told me, it found all of these emails that were older than a certain date. Here's the date the email was received. Here's the sender. Here's the sender's email. Here's who that email was sent to. And here's the subject. And so now I can just scroll through this report and take a look at all the results and see what it is. And you notice every one of these emails is older than 2017. That was my criteria. And if I need to, I could export this report to a CSV file. If I ran my classification and my analysis against other data sources, well, maybe I want to come in now and I went out and I ran against my Exchange mailboxes looking for PCI, personal credit information, or Social Security numbers. Well, here's the results of that, of that analysis. I found 2 emails that actually have PCI information in them. And so again, I can see the sender's name, I can see who it was sent to, I can see when it was sent. If you configure it in the policy, you can even view the full text information of the document, right? And so you can really dig in and see where the violation was. Or I can see I also looked for information that was sent before a certain date. Or maybe I want to come in and look at my G Suite content. And here's a slightly different report I configured. Here's the file name. Here's where that file is. Here's the test in my workflow because I did multiple tests. It found credit card information. And here's the actual text in the document that it found that triggered that positive match. And here's when the document was created. And again, if I need to see it, here's the full text information for that document. So my workflows can generate reports that can provide all type of information, that becomes very, very useful to me, right? And you just configure that as the Altitude administrator. In addition to doing analytics, the other aspect of Altitude is classification. So we don't just analyze the files, But you can also come along and say, well, if I found certain information in a file, maybe I want to label that file. So I may want to create workflows that go out and look for documents that contain certain terms. If I find information like ship to, FOB, vendor ID, purchase order, that may tell me that this document is either an invoice or a PO. I want to label it as such. Or if I find a combination of a social security number pattern and an individual's name, that may indicate this document contains PII information, right? Or maybe I find documents that say medical record or HIPAA or employee benefits in the document. That could be a medical record, right? So I can assign labels to content as I go through and do my analytics. And again, with Altitude, you have the ability to create your own labels. So you can come in and set up labels that are unique to your organization, to your industry, to the regulations you may fall under, or any combination thereof. You set up your labels, you create your analytic workflows and your policies that go out and analyze the information and do the labeling. And then again, at the end of the day, you have a set of results that you can look at, that you can sort and filter and label and export out. And this is the integration point with Gimmal Records Management. For those of you who use that, the labels that Altitude provides can also be used to drive records management policies in the background, right? And any of my screens, if I wanted to, let's say, filter this out where I only wanted to find labels that contain the word contract, I can quickly filter this view, right? And now I've narrowed it down to a much smaller result set. Okay. And the last piece is simply the analytics. I've got all of this information. I've got all of this data. And so I can come out and not only do we have reports that can be generated by the system, but you can combine those reports into visual dashboards so that I can quickly and easily see, here's what's going on in my system. Here's a file count by the age. Well, 36% of my files are less than a year old, but 26% are 3 to 6 years old. And this little tiny slice here, 1% are 6 to 10 years old. So I may want to deal with some of this. Or in regards to my email, right? Most of my emails are 1 to 3 years old, but another 5% are 3 to 6 years old, right? And I probably need to deal with those. Right? So I've got good visibility into what's going on in the system. I can see kind of, what's out there, and I've got, and deal with the information accordingly. So that's it for a short demonstration of Altitude. If you'd like to know more, and we're gonna get to the questions and answers here shortly, but if you want to know more, there's some good blogs out on our website. There's a good blog on governing information overload at blog.gimmal.com, governing information overload. There's another good one on ROT, which stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So 5 reasons your files are rotting. And if you need a short version of the demonstration I just showed you with a voiceover, there's a 5-minute video out on our YouTube channel. And if you can't remember the cryptic YouTube shortcut, I created a bit.ly for you as well called Altitude in 5. All right. So with that, we're going to go, and our last poll question here is, if you'd like to see a live demonstration of Gimmal Altitude that's more in depth, click the button. If you'd like to do it at a later date, let us know. But we'd be happy to come in and walk you through in more depth how you set the workflows up, what you can do with the policies, talk about the different data sources, and really walk you through the full capabilities of the product. We can only do so much in a 30-minute webinar here today. And so while we wait for folks to respond there, Shana, do you want to go ahead and start looking at the questions?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. And one comment regarding the resources you shared on the last screen. If you didn't catch all of that in that brief period of time, we will send those out via email after the webinar as well. So rest assured you'll have those links. So to get started on the questions, the first question we have is kind of a 2-part question, Dean. So I'll ask the first part and then the second part. The first part is, do you have a list of connectors that this integrates with, like PeopleSoft, Maxima, or SAP? Also, are there any stats on what the bandwidth usage is?
Yeah, so the connectors, I showed most of the data sources that we connect to today. We do also can connect to through an OLADB connection. So if you wanted to run analytics against against a database and look for terms in database tables, you can do that as well. And that would deal with a lot of the ones you mentioned, PeopleSoft, Maximo, and others. If you needed to analyze the content, if there are actual documents stored in those systems, we'd probably need to talk about that. There are ways, I think, to do that with SAP, right? If you're doing SAP archiving, the files will be in an external repository already, and we can get to them that way. As far as bandwidth, you know, the connectors and the agents the connectors use are operating server side, not in the cloud. So the processing and the analytics are happening more on the servers where the connectors are, but we can get you more specific details there. The bandwidth usage between the Altitude cloud and the connector itself is relatively low because it's either the connector always talks up to the cloud, never the other way around. So the connector is either polling the Altitude cloud and saying, is there a policy for me to go execute? Is there something for me to do? Are there updates to the connectors or the agents I need to download? Or when a connector does execute a policy and it has results to send back, those report results, those are what are flowing up to the cloud. So the bandwidth is not intense. And then requiring labeling, we do have, you know, our client success team has started building lists of standard terms. So for things like, how do I identify what might be a medical record? And they've built kind of a standard list of terms that we can plug into a workflow, or for contracts or for invoices. And that's where I pulled some of my examples from. So, those would just get plugged into a workflow that would do other things you need. Am I aware of solar winds? I am not, so I don't know of that one off the top of my head. I'll have to go look it up. So I can't answer your question if it's similar there. Sorry.
Great. And the next one is, can your product also analyze laptops and personal devices?
It can. So if you remember back when I showed the connectors, for the most part, the connectors are deployed to servers because you're hitting all of your corporate data repositories. But you can, one of the nice things about Altitude that makes it a little unique is you can deploy connectors out across corporate desktops, because maybe you do need to analyze and look for PII data, or maybe you need to look for, other type of sensitive information. In government, sometimes it's confidential, unclassified information that you need to go out and look for and things like that. So absolutely.
And then I'll squeeze one more question in here before we'll wrap up. Can Altitude move or delete files?
It can. I didn't go into the workflow in depth, all of the different options, but one of the actions you can configure in a workflow would be, I found a certain set of terms, or I found a pattern that matches PII data. I'm going to either move this document somewhere else. Maybe that puts it now under records management control, or maybe I want to put a copy of a document somewhere so that a business analyst or a compliance officer can review that information and see exactly what it is and then make a decision on how to handle it. So that just gets built into the workflow as part of the workflow actions. So.
Great. Well, if anyone has any more questions, our contact information is right there on the screen. You can also send us an email, Dean, if you want to switch to the next screen, at info@gimmal.com. Or if you want to see a personalized demo, if this wasn't quite as in-depth as you would have hoped, you can always visit our website, www.gimmal.com, and submit a demo request form. And for those interested in the recording of this webinar, we'll be sending it out via email in 24 to 48 hours. But if there are no more that are going to sneak in, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.